Group, as you can see, but the way it's going to work is that Charlotte Whittle is going to present she's going to do a presentation on digital media and some of the new forms of media. She'll be followed by Gus Seebeck from 1HD and 10 to talk about their coverage of golf this season and in the future. And then we're going to have a bit of a panel chat amongst the various other panellists. And just wanted to make the point at this point that there are a number of other media outlets, obviously, that do a great job in the promotion of the game and supporting the game of golf. The likes, though some of those aren't here, and I'm talking about the likes of Golf Magazine, Golf Australia. Jeff's here from Golf Australia. Fox Sports, of course, who cover so much live coverage each and every week. Matty McEwen from Fox Sports was to be here, but I think with the delayed coverage of the Canadian Open, that has meant that he's had to stay in Sydney. But we've got a great representation of golf. The golf media, both in print, internet, television, digital media. I think it's a great cross-section. So we'll get underway with Charlotte Whittle, who is Director of Digital Media at 23 in Melbourne. It's a Melbourne-based company who are now working closely with the PGA. And Charlotte will talk about the innovations in digital media and its applications in golf. Would you please welcome Charlotte Whittle.
Thanks, everybody. I'll try not to alienate too many people, and thankfully mine's one of the shorter presentations for today. Okay, I was originally going to talk about the evolution of the screen, and all that means is what we knew as once being a television has turned into a computer and now is a mobile phone. It doesn't really matter to anyone anymore, really, which screen we're looking at. For the intents and purposes of today's presentation, I'll kind of focus mostly on the internet, but that's not to exclude other media. And I guess the reason why the internet is such a boom topic at the moment is that there's 12 million Australians going online every month. That's about 65% of the population. And if you cut out the under 5s and the over 65s, no offence to anyone here, then it looks like it's about 95% penetration. In Australia, there are now more handsets, mobile handsets, than there are people, which is the old joke of there being more sheep than people, but it's now mobile phones. And that mobile phone screen is being looked at 25% more year on year. And that's really affecting where the media is broadcasting and where we're consuming that media. If MySpace was a country, there's been a lot of talk about MySpace when Rupert Murdoch bought it for several millions. Nowadays, MySpace would be a country of about number 11, just behind Japan, with 110 million people each month congregating on MySpace. The next biggest one would have to be Facebook, which is twice again almost in size and just a bit smaller than Indonesia. But actually the biggest place where all of us reside online, of course, is Google. And that would be the third biggest country in the world if it was a country. These aren't small entities, these websites. And I guess every single one of us up here and you out there also represent a website, and you fit in here somewhere. So for the globe, for wherever we are, the internet just can't be ignored. This slide used to be about a grain of sand on a beach, but because of the lunar anniversary, I've changed it to being finding a planet in the solar system. This is a really important one because building a website or publishing a magazine is great, but without distribution, you can't be seen. And at the moment, there are about 190 million websites worldwide. Of course, we all use Google to find them. 25 billion pages. And just a couple of months ago, there were 11 million search results for golf just on Google Australia. And all of us are representative of somebody who's online, and we need to be found. How do you get found out of 11 million websites or 433 million results online? Well, you need to make sure that you're heard, and you need to become a friend of Google. Your website's out there somewhere, and we need to make sure it's on the radar. The impact of search engines is absolutely fundamental to the internet growth, and as we're all used to using Google, not just for finding websites, but also for spell checking and URLs. And here's just some examples of the effect of people looking for information on the AFL, on Turnberry, that was before, on Wimbledon, and as you can see, the amount of searches as an event goes on increases, whereas with crazy events like the death of Steve Irwin or the recent Michael Jackson, they're much more of a spike. And actually, this type of news has the potential to shut down servers, which it did when Michael Jackson died and everyone jumped online. So we can't ignore these things. Everybody in this room has a different way of digesting digital media, but at the end of the day, there's sort of 5 key attributes. There's creating, there's consuming, connecting and customising. We all create content online. This is just a snippet from the Herald Sun where someone has, maybe someone in the room, had gone on and made a comment about an article that had been written. We do this also via YouTube, uploading videos. We consume digital content. 3 are doing a great job of selling digital rights on to their subscribers. So you pay, I think it's $8 to enable you to access to all of the Cricket Australia highlights. We connect, Facebook, social networks, everyone knows about them, Messenger. We customise what we have. We customise our mobile phones. We download an application. We put screensavers on. And possibly the most important aspect of all of this is that we control it. We enable spam filters to restrict the amount of emails we get from people. We block users that we don't want to know about. We pause, we play and rewind TV, and TV has moved on leaps and bounds. It's not as we knew it. So, speaking of TV, and in fact everybody up here and everyone out there, it's the same content, just a different source, and really this is a kind of, is it a bird, is it a plane? You know, what was a print newspaper is now a broadcaster, and it's really difficult sometimes to understand where everyone fits in. But obviously, as the media evolves and emerges, we move more into a digital age. So with television, it's now TV on demand, it's the iTunes video store, it's YouTube video where you can create your own channel, it's catch-up TV, plus the launch of, let alone 1HD, but all the other channels, Freeview and TiVo and so on. So this has really changed the way that we watch and consume TV content. But similarly with newspapers, we take subscriptions via RSS feeds. We don't necessarily have them delivered. There's the news websites. And of course, news aggregators. If you go onto Google News and type in whatever it is you're looking for, it'll bring up from maybe 20, 30 different sources globally what the news is. Sport magazines, and any magazines in fact, obviously they're online as well. They may have video, allow blogs and forums and so on, and you can start to see real convergence across all of these media platforms. And radio, of course, not to forget. Live streaming, which is huge. Podcasts, which is an amazing phenomena for anyone, and absolutely that's how a lot of radio listeners are growing, through the use of podcasts, and digital radio, which is launching as we speak. So really it's not about substituting one media for another, and it's not about the death of television, and it's not about the death of newspapers. It's about how they can all coexist and what their roles are. This is a front page of Time magazine from 2007, and usually they would print, well, it's probably next year, it's going to be Barack Obama, but 2007, the person of the year was you and me and everybody else. And it says at the bottom, yes, you control the information age, welcome to your world. And that's extremely powerful. And at the end of the day, we all now choose what we consume much, much more than ever before. And especially with digital media, there's a huge opportunity to make it more targeted, more trackable and more accountable. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of ideas, and for this I ask you to use your imagination, because I know that there are issues with taking mobile phones onto golf courses, so just forgetting that for a minute, just imagine someone watching a tournament live on the course can watch an instant replay via their mobile TV on their phone, brought to you by the sponsor. They can listen to live audio or radio coverage with a choice of which players they want to listen to the coverage of, or which holes that they want to listen to whilst they're on the course. They can bet instantly on an upcoming hole with thanks to the gambling partner for that tournament. When he gets home, he watches what he missed on catch-up TV online. He follows his favourite player the next day via a player cam, either on TV, digital TV, or maybe online again, including that player's tournament stats and virtual replays with a ball point of view of exactly where the ball went on the green. And of course, you can pause, play, rewind TV of live coverage on 1HD or Fox Sports or wherever you are, and potentially download an iPod app to book a lesson with a pro. That's just one example of how a golf enthusiast can get involved more in a digital age. For pro golfers, and I put a picture of a girl on there because I'm the only one, a touring pro could allow, again, put to the side the mobile phone issue, allow his caddy to Twitter on the course to his followers and journalists about which club he's about to use and what he thought of the last hole. When practising, the player can write a blog and ensure he mentions his sponsors, of course. He makes himself available for interviews post-tournament, for exclusive online video content, for a golf TV online show, and he can offer tips to young golfers via forums and even live chats. So what next? I guess in summary, really, the opportunities digitally have existed for a long time, and depending on which media outlet you look at, but really everything's been brought to the fore in the last couple of years, and the opportunities are absolutely boundless. And I think for everybody here, it's not really a matter of when you'll use digital media for your organisation or for you personally. It'll be more about how. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. The mind boggles, doesn't it? Now, Gus Seebeck will make a presentation on behalf of Channel 10 and 1HD. Gus, as many of you probably know, was originally the Tour Operations Manager for the PGA Tour. He then became the General Manager of the PGA Tour, and he's recently become the Program Manager for Channel 10 Sport and 1HD. So Gus will be here to talk about their coverage, as I said earlier on, of golf this season and maybe just looking into the future as far as 1HD is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, Gus Seebeck.
Thank you, Bruce, for those kind words, and thanks everyone for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you briefly today. I've only got about a dozen slides just to work through on a couple of topics before obviously we open up the panel and have a bit more of an in-depth discussion. I just wanted to give everybody a bit of an update about One, which is our new baby. It's been on air now for about 4.5 months, and we think it's just wonderful. We hope all of you do as well. Give you a quick overview of how it's travelling in terms of some of our key metrics from revenue and ratings and reach and a few other things. And then obviously to the more matters at hand, our commitment to golf and where we stand in terms of the events that we'll be broadcasting towards the end of this year, and obviously everything moving forward. And then also want to just quickly spend a little bit of time on some ratings information and perhaps dispel a few myths about golf and how it rates and a few other bits and pieces. So I hope I can make this down. There we are. So just a quick look at how we're tracking here at 1HD. If we look at our total TV universe in Australia, it's approximately 5.4 million TV households. STV there obviously stands for subscription television. Foxtel's penetration has plateaued at about 31% roughly across Australia. It's obviously a little bit higher in the major metropolitan capital cities and a little bit lower in the regional areas. The figure we have here of 65% penetration for digital television is a little bit of an aggressive figure, but we're confident that we can support it. The official OzTam figure is a little bit lower, but we know through our contacts in the industry, the Sonys and the Panasonics and the various other members of the federal government's digital switchover task force show us that digital television in Australia is booming. It's impossible to buy an analogue TV now, and it's virtually impossible to buy a standard definition digital television as well. So the growth of digital television is certainly far outstripping subscription television, and as we move towards full analogue switch off at the end of 2013, our penetration is only going to increase even more. So quickly on One, we're obviously available to all homes who have access to digital free-to-air. We're also now fully up to speed on the Foxtel platform, so you can view One through the Foxtel regardless of whether you have a high definition or a standard definition television. The only caveat there is you will need to be a cable subscriber. It's not available to satellite subscribers just as yet. Mr Williams wants to charge us an enormous amount to piggyback his satellites, so we're not quite there just yet. And we are available as well in overlap areas through Ozstar. So if you haven't had the opportunity to view One as yet, I certainly encourage you to do so. And when you watch golf in full high definition in all its glory, you'll think that anything else looks like black and white 4x3. It is truly remarkable and spectacular. Earlier this month we launched in regional Australia, certainly down the eastern seaboard of regional Australia through Southern Cross, only available on their high definition service at the moment, but it certainly is available through those regional areas. And this Thursday we begin to transmit into Tasmania via TDT down there. So essentially gives us a footprint of the entire eastern seaboard and certainly the major capital cities in the centre and the west as well. Since our launch, we've reached approximately 35% of the Australian population, so 35% of Australians have sampled One. And a quick snapshot of last week's ratings, just as an example. We reached just a tick over 2.6 million people watched at least 1 minute of programming on One last week, which represents 18% of the TV population. And if you have a look at it there compared to the current Fox Sports channels, you can see that obviously on an individual basis we're more than double the individual channels, and when you add them all together we're still ahead. So after only being on air for about 4.5 months, with Foxtel being around now for a good 11 or 12 years, I think, we're pretty proud of how we're travelling there. I hope everyone can see that. Those numbers are a little bit small, I apologise. The median age of the channel is 40. It does skew fairly heavily male. We knew that would be the case when we started. However, we have made a deliberate approach to make sure that we can have programming that's appealing to females and certainly to children. We have a number of high-profile female sports, netball, swimming. Certainly, you know, when we get to the Commonwealth Games, those types of major events as well, we're very appealing to women. We hope that obviously the golf is appealing to women as well, and we do have our commitment to the ANZ Ladies Masters moving forward. Interesting there that, as I said, 66% skew towards men. The average age is 40, which is probably slightly younger than what we thought. We probably thought it was going to head more towards the 50 mark, but interesting that I suppose with the take-up of digital technology and perhaps the need to be a little bit more technically savvy in order to access the channel is probably showing that in the early part of the channel's evolution it is skewing slightly younger than we thought, but that's certainly not a bad thing in our perspective. I actually just received these couple of slides this morning, about 11 o'clock this morning. I wasn't going to include them, but I just thought I'd throw them in from a company called Fusion Strategy, who's an independent media analyst. They send out a report to us and to the industry every couple of weeks about how One's tracking. And here we go, apologies. So this is a bit of independent data, so it didn't necessarily come from me. And you can see there that they essentially back up those figures that we are tracking, I think, ahead of where everybody thought that we would be at this point in time, including ourselves, which is always nice. And we're far outstripping the pay TV channels in terms of our performance. And if you have a look at those, including the more general entertainment Foxtel channels as well, we're travelling along nicely. So we're pretty comfortable with that. We're also, from a revenue perspective, in what is probably the most challenging advertising market of a generation. We've written so far this year in excess of $20 million of incremental revenue just in the channel, which means that as of year one we will turn a modest profit, which will be the first time that any digital multi-channel in the world has turned a profit in year one, which shows that, as I said, in a tremendously difficult and challenging advertising market, that we are on a winner, and when things do start to turn, we certainly hope to be able to take advantage of the upside that will come along with that as well. So, specifically to golf, as I mentioned before, we've still got a series of events to come in 2009, including the final World Golf Championship event from Bridgestone in Ohio next weekend, I believe, and the Singapore Open later in the year, and also very proud that the Australian Open will come to 10 and 1 for the first time, I think, in history as of 2009, as part of a 3-year deal with Golf Australia. We're looking very much forward to heading out to New South Wales as part of the first of our 3-year deal there, and obviously our arrangement with the PGA of Australia is set to continue for a further 5 years. In 2010, 23 live events on One, 8 of which, including the Masters, the US Open, the Ryder Cup and all the domestic tournaments, will be simulcast on 10. And if you have a look at what that means in terms of the number of hours, we will show more golf on One in 2010 at this stage than any other sport. So it's a significant part of our portfolio. We have a major commitment to golf. We need to make it work for the success of our channel, given how much we rely on the number of hours of content there. So if you have a look at it, basically based on 4 days with 4.5 hours a day, that's 420 hours before we replay anything. So we're talking in excess of 600 hours of golf next year on One, and the majority of the premier events as well will be simulcast on 10. So the only thing that comes close is Major League Baseball. We've got 5 live Major League Baseball games every week for about 35 weeks a year. So you can see the volumes of content that we'll have from golf is very, very significant for us. What we plan to do with these events is, wherever we can, subject to the rules of the anti-siphoning list, we'll show increased coverage on One. Certainly with the PGA Championship, which is not a listed event, we can do much more on One than that, which is wonderful. The Australian Open still does sit on the anti-siphoning list, which basically means that we have to show everything on 10 before we can show it on One, if that makes sense. I won't get into too much detail, it's a bit confusing and horribly boring, but we can replay on One and we can simulcast, but we can't show anything any first-run content on One before we show it on 10. So the anti-siphoning list is currently up for review by the Minister's Office, and we hope that that situation will change by the time we get to the events in 2010. But certainly for this year, with the Australian Open sitting on the anti-siphoning list, we have to be a little bit careful about what we can do there. We plan to do an exclusive hour on one after each day's play for those two events. Basically give us an opportunity to spend a bit more time reviewing the day, previewing tomorrow, what happened today, interviews, post-round analysis, all sorts of different bits and pieces in that hour. Obviously live from the golf course when Channel 10 moves over and heads off to news. You can stick around on one and see a bit more in-depth analysis. So give us a good opportunity to integrate more with our sponsors and a bit more unique content, a bit more in-depth discussion about what happened each day. Having one there also gives us an opportunity to replay either the entire day's play or selected parts of the day's play a bit later on in the night, which is terrific for those who may have missed it. And we really want to try and bring a lot more enhancements to golf, which you may see as part of coverage in the US through CBS or NBC, or perhaps even through the UK with Sky TV. We're working on trying to bring a few of those enhancements as well. So working on a fair bit of that stuff at the moment. And one major area which I want to spend a little bit of time on was, some of you, we've picked off a few people already, but we will be launching our own dedicated golf show as well on one, with the first episode airing on the 27th of October, I think is a Tuesday, so the last Tuesday in October, under the working title of The Pro Shop. Basically the idea there is that when you head to the golf course, the first place you usually go to is to the Pro Shop. It's a source of all the information. It's where you can buy your golf ball, your golf clubs, you pick up your pencil, you pick up your scorecard, all the information from the pro there. You head out and play, and then it's essentially the first place that you come back to when your round is over. So 23 episodes at this stage from late October through to mid-April, with a 3 or 4 week hiatus over Christmas. And we really want this to be a show that golfers enjoy watching. They find it informative, they find it enjoyable, they're prepared to put aside an hour of their week to spend watching our program. I don't think, certainly if we take a snapshot of everybody in this room, that we hope that it's a show that you enjoy, that you find enjoyable and you find informative. It won't be our version of the PGA golf show on Fox Sports. Obviously a different time of year. They focus a lot more on tournament results from the US and Europe and Asia and the ladies events. Given the fact that we start in October, we will be using it to preview and review the Australian events and other events from the region, but it will also have significant elements that are not shown really on any other golf shows here in Australia. We want to use it as an opportunity to showcase the wonderful courses around the country, and we do have the opportunity to go and visit a lot of these golf courses. We encourage you to get in touch with us if you would like us to come to your course and perhaps host the show from your course, or and potentially review the accommodation or the other tourism opportunities in the region, whether it be wineries or beaches or whatever that might be. We look at the opportunities to road test the latest equipment, so we'll have a look at the latest golf balls, the latest drivers, the latest wedges, putters, whatever that may be. There'll be tips, hints, there'll be celebrities, all sorts of things. So really it's a blank canvas that we're working from. We're open to all ideas from everybody within the industry, but in order for this show to work and in order for our overall golf portfolio to work and to continue to grow and continue to strengthen back to where it potentially was and has been, we need everybody to engage with us, and we need everybody to throw their ideas around, and we need everybody to come on board and share what they think we should be showing. Because with the knowledge in this room and everybody that we know within this room, there's a wonderful opportunity to create an enjoyable show every hour, and then obviously watch some wonderful tournaments every weekend as well. So Scott Young is with me today. Scott works for a company called Five Oceans Media, who will be producing the show on our behalf. So if you haven't met Scott already, I encourage you to do so at the end of today if you would like to throw around some ideas about how we can showcase, whether it be your course or your product or whatever it is, however you're involved in the industry. As I said, we're working from a totally blank canvas. We want to build this show so it's enjoyable to golfers, and encourage you to come on board and be part of that journey with us. So just before I finish, I just wanted to have a quick look at some ratings from last year's events. Now, there's so much ratings information that's thrown around in our industry. If you are like me and you get the ratings information from all the various networks on any given morning, you'd be sure that any of the 3 given networks had the most popular program of the night before. They all won the night. They all had the highest share in their demographic. Somehow they all managed to win and all be number one. Now, essentially, none of that's erroneous. It's just the way they choose to report the data, and they work through the data to find the story that fits with what they're trying to say. Now, we all remember our good friend from Channel 7, Ian Johnson, a few years ago at the Masters, when his comments about the performance of golf, the ratings of golf, whether or not golf works commercially on free-to-air television. Well, in my mind, that's simply just looking at which numbers we report, really. Now, if you look at these three events, obviously it doesn't quite do justice to the PGA here. I just wanted to point that out because obviously the first 2 days of the PGA were on 10HD, which was back then our high definition channel, and we didn't have any ratings data available. So essentially these figures for the PGA are based on 2 days, whereas the other events are based on 4 days. So essentially they're roughly half. Now, if you take 5 hours a day on a Sunday, these are obviously the Sunday figures, always going to be very, very difficult to get a high average audience across 5 hours, regardless of whatever it is you're showing. So traditionally, an average audience is what's being reported across 5 hours. Now, there's obviously 2 ways to get that number up. It's either to get more people to watch across 5 hours, which is not without its challenges, or it's to condense the coverage and have a shorter period, which again has challenges with regard to the entitlements for a lot of the commercial sponsors with the tournaments. But if you look at the peak figures there, now the peak obviously represents the number of people who are watching, the highest number of people nationally watching any one individual minute of the program, usually occurs right towards the end, obviously as the tournament is coming towards its conclusion, or people switching on for the news, whichever way you want to look at it. Very respectable figures there. Obviously, playoff always helps. A close finish always helps. If it's, if someone's winning by 6 shots with 2 holes to play, a little bit more difficult. But the figure that really gets me is a cumulative reach number, and essentially what that means is the number of different individuals who have watched at least 1 minute of the tournament across the 4 days. And if you were to sit down and say to me that 25% of the population watched at least 1 minute of the Australian Open, so 1 in every 4 people watched at least 1 minute of the Australian Open last year, I'd say that's a pretty respectable figure. So to me, those numbers tell a pretty exciting story. And it also shows that that there are still over 300,000 people who will sit down and watch golf for 5 hours, which is it's a pretty big commitment to someone to take out their entire afternoon to watch 5 hours of golf. I'm not sure how many people in this room, we're pretty much the most captive of audiences, would say that they actually sat down and watched all 5 hours of Sunday of the Australian Open. But there are 325,000 people who did, and there are nearly 1 million people who watched the finish, and there are over 3.6 million people who watched at least 1 minute across the 4 days. So just wanted to sort of leave you with that figure, that it's certainly not all bad, and we haven't really started to crank things up from a 10 and a 1 point of view yet, and it hasn't been shown a lot of love over the past 10 years. So when we start doing that, I certainly think we'll see these numbers improving. So that's it from me. Thank you for your time, and look forward to having a bit more of a chat now. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Gus. And congratulations to 10 and 1HD for their commitment to covering golf. As we know, the history of golf coverage in recent years has been a bit of it's all over the place really, and I think 10's commitment to really get behind it over the last couple of years and with looking at what, moving forward, what they're going to do is, I think it's fantastic for the tour and fantastic for the game in this country. I've already introduced some of the panellists, but what we're going to do is do what we did yesterday with the girls and with the junior panel as well, is really just run through each of the panellists and ask them a few questions on their particular areas of the, whatever the medium they're involved in. Bernie, we might start with you. Nice to have you down here.
Thanks, Bruce. Nice to be here.
Bernie, as some of you, I'm sure most of you know, Bernie's an outstanding golf journalist. He's with News Limited and the Courier Mail, and has regularly covered the Australasian Tour events here and has been to the Masters on a number of occasions and elsewhere. And Bernie, when we talked the other day, you sort of raised the issue about the flux that the newspaper industry is in to a large extent. How is that impacting on your coverage of golf or coverage of golf generally?
Well, unfortunately, I don't want to be a total cynic. After 35 years, I'm cynical enough, I think. But, yeah, the newspaper industry is going through a very, very difficult period, both here and overseas. There's over 100 newspapers in the US have closed in the last 12, 18 months. Many of those newspapers were going for the best part of 100 years. We had 21 redundancies at the Courier Mail 2 Fridays ago. And I think we're in limbo. You've heard all about the new media, and certainly newspapers are the dinosaur of the media landscape. And I think the struggle is to find what direction newspapers are going to pursue in coming years. They're struggling to retain circulation and readership and not doing a bad job. There's not great circulation gains, there's marginal losses, but the great impact has been the loss of advertising revenue. I think in Rupert Murdoch's last 6-monthly report, his newspaper advertising revenue worldwide had slumped something like 92%. And by any standards, that's just a stunning plummet of revenue. And the bottom line for people working at the coalface is that if you don't have the advertising, you have much skinnier newspapers. So as a result, instead of having maybe 24 pages of sport in the Brisbane Courier Mail on a Saturday, we often now have to make do with 15 or 16. Therefore, competition for that space in the newspapers is intense, and particularly in periods where you've got your footy season. We don't seem to have any overlap period now. We don't have any hiatus where you have October used to be the month where not much went on. But now it's full on. Worldwide, there's major sport being played. And golf, you really do struggle to get golf stories in the paper, I've got to say. I think a lot of the reasons are the fragmentation of the tour over here in recent times, the lack of continuity. We have those marvellous 3 weeks prior to Christmas, then we have a break until February, then we have 1 or 2 tournaments, and then everyone goes overseas again. So there is a problem. I think, as Charlotte was saying, the newspapers have put a great store now on their websites. They still haven't figured out how to make money from them, as Neil Breen told this very forum 12 months ago, the editor of the Sydney Sunday Telegraph. But you'll see that minutes after Nathan Green won that playoff this morning, it was up there on all the newspaper websites around Australia. So that's a plus for the newspapers, and obviously all the other golf-related websites are doing exactly the same thing. But the traditional print media still doesn't quite know where it's going. I don't want to take up other people's time, but there's a trend now. Newspapers don't know whether to be serious or frivolous. The News Limited papers have been dumbed down considerably. I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I don't particularly like that. But we saw a perfect example in golf during last year's Australian Open, where the Daily Telegraph just focused on John Daly. I think to the genuine golf fan, it really rankled, that sort of coverage. It was badly at the expense of the tournament. There was some marvellous golf obviously played. It was pushed into, the 47th paragraph on the story, 18 pages back in the newspaper, where John Daly was all over the front and the back page. So they've dumbed down, they've sensationalised, and I think sometimes that's a difficult thing for people who are very close to the game and love the game to deal with. Most golf fans didn't like that. I'm sure the paper thought, well, that's a small percentage. The public at large probably loved it. So and that's something that we've yet got to come to terms with. Just to finish, I think a positive sign on the horizon is that the positive case study for newspapers worldwide is that the serious newspapers in the UK and the United States are the ones that are doing well. The serious broadsheets, where if you want to seriously read a well-researched, well-written story about golf, written by a credible writer who you're familiar with, whether it be John Hopkins on the Times or someone on the LA Times or the New York Times or whatever, those writers and those papers have a genuine following. And I think in Australia it might come back to that, because websites and TV news give you a short, quick grab, instantaneous information, which is fantastic. But for the serious follower, you don't get the analytical stuff, you don't get the in-the-locker-room stuff, you don't get what happened when the guy went to the practice range afterwards. I'm optimistic enough to think and hope that style of reporting is going to come back. But I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be pretty difficult, and particularly for sports like golf and tennis and athletics and swimming that aren't right up there. You know, they're probably, because they don't have something big on every week of the year.
Yeah, thank you, Bernie. We'll come back to you also. Sam Arthur, you're the publisher of Inside Golf, change of name recently from Inside Social Golf, which was probably, I suppose, confusing the market a little bit. Do you feel the decision's been a good one?
Yeah, it has, Bruce. We did a bit of research earlier in the year. We wanted to expand the publication. We wanted to offer more golf content to every type of golfer and to include every part of the industry. And our research came up very positive in doing that. We wanted to expand quickly and take advantage of certain opportunities out there. And we've achieved that. We've grown our product 20 pages since February, pretty opposite to what's happening back there. And it's worked well from a commercial point of view as well, but everything's going well to plan.
For those of you that aren't familiar with Inside Golf, it's a free, I hate to use the word giveaway, it's almost downplays it a bit, but it is available in golf clubs at no charge. Sam, you've often said that you'd like the industry to have a far greater input, and it's a really good opportunity for a publication like yours, which really does cover a lot of local golf and Australian golf, for people here who have got good stories to provide them to you, provided, of course, that they provide good, not only good content, not necessarily well-written content, but good quality imagery to go with some of the stories. That's a hell of an advantage if they do.
Yeah, it is, Bruce. I think in general the golf industry do not provide what's required from a publishing point of view. I think it's pretty slack out there. This is talking on in terms of free publicity, nothing to do with sales or anything like that. To get exposure for your golf club, an event, a new product, be very organised in submitting to the editors, the appropriate editors, the detailed information, make it very detailed. Imagery's always been a big problem. If we get small photos, we just won't get published, and your story or your piece of information will be missed out. So I think in general be very organised and make contact with the editor, and you'll be amazed at how much free publicity you'll get.
Steve Kuipert, editor of Golf Digest. I guess one of the discussion points you often get with magazines these days is the balance between international and local content, and how much of a control do you have there? Obviously you've got your connections with the US affiliate. How do you try and get that balance between local and international content?
Yeah, I guess, Bruce, that's the point of difference between our magazine. We do have that foreign affiliate with US Golf Digest, and Golf Digests around the world now are in 30 plus countries. And it's entirely our control. There's no edict from above or from America. It's up to us to decide how much or how little. It does vary month to month and issue to issue, but it's probably about 50 to 55% of our own content, and the rest coming from the American magazine. And that's primarily instruction and equipment. We tend to focus our time and resources on player profiles and interviews, tournament previews and travel and other bits and pieces.
The immediacy of the internet has changed the dynamics of golf magazines, I would think, to a large extent, because your lead-in time would, be 5 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 week turnaround from close-off until publication?
From the start, it's probably from the time we actually send a magazine off to the printer to the time it hits the newsstands is probably about 10 to 12 days.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
From the very end.
Yeah, okay. So does that, changing the dynamic, it means, I guess it might close one door in terms of tournament reviews, because by the time people get to read your magazine, it's old hat, virtually, but it opens up other opportunities in terms of maybe player profiles, more emphasis on that, and as you said, more emphasis perhaps on instruction. Yeah,
and in terms of tournaments, we always do much bigger previews rather than reviews for that exact reason.
Steve Scott, IC Golf, Director of IC Golf. I guess people will probably know that we've both been involved in IC Golf in our own way over the last 8 or 9 years, 10 years or so. There was a hell of a lot of scepticism about it back in those early days, not so much IC Golf, but just golf on the internet. It's changed a hell of a lot in the last 10 years, hasn't it, in terms of acceptance?
Yeah, it certainly has, and and I can understand the scepticism when we launched the site 10 years ago, but you could still argue that there still is a lot of scepticism out there with the online media. I think what people need to understand that the internet's been around for 20 years now. It's been the fastest growing medium for the last 5 years. We launched 10 years ago, as you said. In the last 2 years, we've tripled our traffic audience. We've grown our database from 33,000 to 100,000. So it really gives you a good understanding of where that medium's going, and we expect to double that again over the next 12 months to 200,000.
Do you think the golf industry locally has embraced it as much as they could or should or would?
Not as much as they should. Not compared to the other industries. There was a survey done that I read last week. The top 150 companies in Australia, they spend 37% of their advertising and marketing budget purely on digital. And I think the golf industry's certainly got a long way to go in that regard.
Mitchell Ward, we'll get to your particular concern soon, but just listening to Steve's sentiments there, any response in that regard? You are the CEO of GolfLink, which most of you know is a is a site that was originally, I suppose, established as a handicapping site, but has now gone on to other areas and is building a fairly significant traffic flow and database.
Yeah, look, back to Steve's comments there about...
Is that on? You got the other one, Steve? Can you get that down there?
How's that? Yeah, look, back to Steve's comments there. We were launched sort of 10 years ago as well, and I think to the golf industry probably a little bit before its time, quite leading edge with being an online handicapping system, centralised, etc. But we have come a long way, and it's all to the positive, I think. From a GolfLink point of view, I'd have to say that things are looking quite strong, and it's all about, for us, integrating with our members. We've got over 400,000 people on our database now, every private golf club member in Australia, and 1,200 clubs as well. And it's about us integrating with those guys, engaging with our members, and offering them a broad range of products and services over and above the handicapping system. So that's a big focus for us, and we're very excited about the next couple of years.
I know you have a tremendous database, I guess, because of your association with Golf Australia. I know one of the things it's going to allow you to do is to establish this research base, which you're launching, I think, on August the 1st. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we've been working very closely with the AGIC on that. And this is a terrific project for the industry. It's very important for the industry as a whole, for the clubs, for the members, and also for our commercial partners. There's been a big gap in this industry when it comes to data. I've come from the retail background of FMCG grocery, and at the touch of a button you can find almost anything online. So to actually get in the golf industry now will be a very big positive.
Steve, we'll get back to you. I mean, obviously IC Golf started as a news site, I suppose you could say, but the forums have become incredibly popular. The Tea Times is really building momentum. Obviously you guys analyse exactly who goes where and does what on the site. Where are most people going when they go to a site like yours?
Yeah, the forums are certainly extremely popular. They take up 19% of all our traffic. The other areas of the site that are popular are the golf equipment reviews and new products coming out. It's certainly easily the biggest area of the site, and I think we need to do a lot more on that. The golf previews and reviews that get written with the tournaments, that's something that we write every day. But of the articles that get written on the site, it's the amateur article that seem to be by far and away the most popular. The top 5 stories that were written this year have all been amateur stories, so that's where analysing all the articles that get read on the site, we can, work out how many articles get read when and where, and therefore, we can really tailor our content to suit the type of audience that we've got.
So it kind of gives you instant feedback in that regard.
Sorry?
Well, the internet really gives you instant feedback in that regard.
It does, yeah.
Steve Kuipert, I know you wanted to make this point, and I should have mentioned it earlier on, that when the AGIC was established first, there were some areas of the media that didn't necessarily want to be part of it. They wanted to stand aside and maybe report on the AGIC independently or separately. And I know, Steve, you're very strong on the other side of that equation. Just tell us your thoughts about that.
Yeah, there was a bit of a split, I guess, amongst the Golf Writers Association of exactly what role the media should play on the council. And I guess just speaking from the magazine's point of view, we very much feel like we're part of the industry. Everybody wants the industry to grow. We want more golfers playing more often. Okay, yes, that's good for our magazine, but it's good for the industry as well. And so, yeah, personally, I was quite strong for the media to be part of it, but I could also appreciate the other point of view.
Very political. Mitchell, I think it's important that each and every... I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think I'd like to reiterate it, and I'm sure you'll back me up here, or at least I hope you will. This is in terms of each and every golf club establishing their own good quality website with good imagery. Just make it look and feel good and be something that people want to visit and investigate various other areas of the site. And I'm sure it's important for the work that you're doing on GolfLink in terms of having sites, having their own sites, which, and you're bringing traffic to those sites as well. And it's the same thing with IC Golf.
Yeah, look, the clubs have a fantastic opportunity, and it's about the new technology out there. Charlotte went through it before. There's some terrific opportunities, and I think from a GolfLink point of view, we've seen some amazing results with video being put on our website. I don't think I've seen a club out there with a video snapshot of their club yet. Might be there. If it is, I apologise, but there's a great opportunity to showcase your product. It's an excellent product. There's fantastic golf courses in this country. And I think there's terrific opportunities to also interact with your members a little bit more. And it's about researching those technologies, and they're all out there, and they're actually very easy to access these days.
Charlotte, you were keen to mention about digital broadcasting rights, and I don't know whether you necessarily touched on it in your presentation. Maybe you can just outline some of your thoughts on that.
Sure, and I think Gus probably has something to say about that as well. Certainly over the last 5 years or so, we've seen a real change in how the sports properties are selling their digital rights, and by that I mean access to, for example, AFL games online or NRL games online. Cricket Australia, Tennis Australia have their own TV online shows where either by subscription or paid for by advertisers. And I guess to the points that we've already discussed, it's very difficult to find the right model to actually allow these things to be self-funding. For the consumer, the best place for the consumer is just like television, is that it's advertiser funded, but it's in a way that's not too intrusive. And the last couple of years, there's been a lot of segmenting of rights. Obviously, 10 and 1 have the TV broadcast rights for the golf, but digital rights remain, and that means that the PGA have an opportunity to leverage the digital rights for online and mobile. And just as an example, the V8 Supercars a couple of years ago, to be the headline sponsor online only, was $250,000. This year the same again for Cricket Australia to sponsor the Ashes, just that part of the Ashes, was $500,000 in total. It was the amount of sponsorship money they were just getting for online only. So there's a huge growth in it, and it's, I guess, a lot to be said for not underestimating the assets you have.
I guess protecting those rights is a bit of an issue, is it, in terms of every piece of the media wanting some of them? And
yes, and there's legislation for that, obviously. Yeah. But also there's opportunity, again, to extend to international rights, which is a separate issue. And online it's so much easier because you can tell where people are accessing the web from. So therefore, if you're in Australia, you may access it free, but if you're going to watch it from overseas, perhaps there's a small fee. So it's really about finding that balance. But at the moment, it's advertiser funded, and that seems to be the best model so far.
Gus, are you able to give us a feel for how widespread the coverage will be? I mean, you've talked about the events you're covering this year. I don't think you mentioned the regional and state championships, which are going to be part of what you're doing, I understand. But in terms of the spread of coverage, I guess it gets down to the PGA Tour and where they sell those rights to. That's my understanding of how it works. But do you have a feel for where when 10 goes to air, quite where it's taken up, the Golf Channel in the States? I suppose it depends on the event, does it?
Look, it does a little bit, and it also depends on whether the event is part of a, for example, if it's an IMG-owned event, they obviously have arrangements through Asia for a lot of their packaged events, which can piggyback off their European Tour, European Tour Productions deal. So they obviously through Star Sports in the US and in Asia, and then Supersport in South Africa and various other networks through other parts of the world. We tend to only operate in this part of the world. We'll only buy the free-to-air domestic rights here, and then it's obviously up to either PGA or perhaps one of their agencies to then on-sell those to other parts of the world. But I know with the proliferation of golf content and golf channels, and obviously the Golf Channel is very dominant through the US and Japan, and there's an enormous amount of golf content throughout Asia and South Africa and the UK and continental Europe as well. So there is certainly an opportunity for all of the events here, and certainly as part of the new One Asia deal as well, in terms of their global broadcast rights sales. Again, we would only be interested in the domestic rights. We don't act as an agent to then on-sell those to other parts of the world. That would be through another organisation, either the PGA itself or through one of its agencies. But as I said, there is no reason now with so many cable channels across the world that all these events couldn't be taken up in a vast number of countries.
economy of scales of carrying 4 days coverage versus 2, and there's an argument for both, I suppose, because of the shotgun nature of the first 2 days coverage of a tournament. With one, you've got the luxury of having a vehicle that you require content for anyway. But there's an argument both ways, isn't there? Because a lot of people say 3 hours focused coverage at the weekend is probably better than 4 days or the first 2 days. I suppose it depends on whether you're a golf purist or whether you just want to watch action-packed coverage.
Yeah, but I think there's room for probably both. Certainly with what we're doing, with having a dedicated sport channel 24 hours a day, live unique content is ideal for us. So in an ideal world, if we took the anti-siphoning list out of play, as I was talking about before, I think perhaps an ideal situation would be that we had an increased amount of coverage, certainly on Thursday, Friday, and in the earlier parts of Saturday and Sunday on one. Longer form content, live and exclusive, as I said, for a golf audience works very, very well for us. Not necessarily so important about the individual ratings on those particular hours or half hours or whatever it may be. Sold more as on a pay TV model, which is certainly more like a cost per thousand, so it's smaller cost for any individual advertisement, but a higher rotation across the day, so it's easier for us to justify having, say, for example, 6 or even 7 hours worth of live golf on one across sort of Thursday, Friday, perhaps 3 or 4 hours in the morning on Saturday and Sunday, and then, as you suggest, a condensed package of approximately 3 hours, similar to the duration of an AFL game or an NRL game or perhaps a longer movie, which is what people are generally used to sitting down and consuming sport and other parts of TV in a sort of a 2 to 3 hour block, not, as I said, across the whole 5 hours, would improve the average audience on 10, therefore improve the commercial viability of golf as a free-to-air product, at the same time allowing us to show more for that base of golf fanatics or engaged golf fans who want to see more. So we have the opportunity, hopefully, to be able to do both of those things. And you can either, if you've got nothing else on for your Saturday and you just want to sit down with a bag of chips and a six-pack and watch all 6 hours, wonderful. If you've only got a couple of hours in the afternoon, you can come, you can turn on 10 and see a more condensed, perhaps exciting, shorter form of the game, of the tournament, in the afternoon, heading towards a conclusion. So I think there's certainly an offering for both there.
A lot of people here, and I'm not sure whether you're able or prepared to say this, but I'd be interested to know, maybe a lot of people in here would be interested to know, what it costs to cover an event. I mean, is it $500,000, is it $750,000, 200, to do a typical 4-day event in Australia? What would you be looking at?
Well, it depends on a whole range of things, but if you started with a blank canvas and you wanted the best possible event that you possibly could, so that would be 4 days of coverage, 5 hours perhaps per day, which gives you, if you're playing in 3 balls, it's generally 4.5 hours to play. Roughly, depends if Langers is on the card, it's 4 hours 50, maybe 5 hours. He's been distracted by the pie stand a few too many times. But
so watching you, Langers.
So you need a good 5 hours to be able to set up, tell the story, get the players on the first tee, make sure you get them all the way through until they finish. So 5 hours a day, 4 days. If you're looking at all 18 holes, depending on what part of the country it is, obviously Perth costs more than Sydney. Melbourne costs potentially less, but full bells and whistles, you're looking at somewhere between $600,000 to $650,000 to cover a 4-day golf tournament on air. Now that is a significant amount of money, and it's not easy in the current market to recoup all those costs plus the additional that you need to make any cream on the top. So that is certainly one of the challenges. When you look at that compared to an AFL game, for example, now when we do an AFL game at the MCG, it'll cost us roughly $100,000 and $110,000 to produce an individual AFL game. So that's over and above the rights. So we're talking about very condensed in one stadium, set camera positions, truck pulls up, basically plugs into the stadium, unplugs at the end and drives away. So it is a significant amount of money. And sorry, just so I can add, the benefits of a 2-day coverage is marginal savings because you've still got the truck there, you've still got all the equipment there. Your only real cost savings are crew, so cameramen, editors, all the people that you need. You don't pay them you only pay them for 2 days and not 4, and potential signal delivery and satellite uplink costs. But if you're looking at, say, $600,000 for a 4-day coverage, it's not going to cost you $300,000 for 2 days. It's probably going to cost you more like $400 to $450, maybe even $500 for 2 days, because your hardware and your trucks and everything that you need, you've got to have those there regardless of how many days you do, and that's where the bulk of the expense is, and in graphics and all the other sorts of things that you need.
Bernie, I guess we've seen over the last couple of days, we've seen guys like Richard Miles, and today we had Greg Highwood from Tourism Victoria, who are obviously passionate golfers. Is it handy to have a sports editor who loves golf? Does it change the dynamics in terms of trying
Yeah,
to...
look, I've got no doubt the personal whims come into judgment when decisions are made. And if you've got someone there who actually likes golf, follows golf, and even more importantly might have an occasional game, it really is significant. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is.
Does it make it easier for you as a somebody sitting at the Courier Mail and your Tuesday column, comes out and you're getting input from the industry? If they send it to you, does it? It's probably an obvious question, but does it make it easy for you to if somebody sends stuff?
Yeah,
through?
unquestionably. Look, over many years, I think I was just going to say before. I think we all agree that probably the mainstream newspaper, metropolitan newspaper daily coverage of amateur golf is appalling, and it's probably got worse and worse over the years. I remember when newspapers used to actually send journalists to cover Australian amateur championships, no matter where they'd be across the country. Now, if you've got a golf-friendly newspaper, this year, fortunately for us, the Australian Amateur was at Royal Queensland, and we managed to give it, I thought, was a reasonable coverage. In other states, you struggle. It depends whether you've got a designated golf writer. There's not a full-time golf writer on an Australian newspaper. This year, for the first time in more than 40 years, the two major operators, News Limited and John Fairfax, didn't send golf writers to either the US Masters or the British Open. And it's more than 40 years since that happened. And I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, so I'm certain they're not going to send anyone next year, or perhaps the ensuing years, because I think when you lose that sort of regularity, you lose, you're never going to get it back again, unfortunately. Tom Ramsey was probably the last of the full-time golf writers on Australian newspapers, and the simple reason they don't have full-time golf writers is because there's not enough for them to write about. You just can't justify having someone being a designated golf writer. But getting back to what you said, Bruce, I think in the areas, Terry Wilson down here has just finished at the Gold Coast Bulletin for many, many years, did a great job, had a designated page. I'm not sure what day it ran, it might have been a Thursday, I think, where the accent was on local golf. It was the amateurs, it was club golf. Fortunately, we don't get a lot of space now in Brisbane, but every Tuesday, that golf column's been running almost 50 years on a Tuesday. Try and get as much local content. The Sunshine Circuit, the Queensland division of the PGA of Australia, Golf Queensland, through different administrative regimes have been cognizant of the importance of feeding information, because it does reach a wide readership and people come to expect it, golfers come to expect it on a Tuesday morning. And I've got to say that I do get great cooperation from the professional and the amateur body. And I think because it's been in place for a long time. But I can understand and empathise with the websites. It's a matter, I think, of getting people educated just to do it and do it religiously, and then when they move on, pass it on to their successor, so that the culture is there, that as a matter of course, you keep everyone in the loop and everyone's happy. They get content, you get free publicity.
Just on a final note, before we perhaps go to some questions, Bernie, I'll ask you again. We spoke to Graham Papworth this morning, who of course is the Vice President of the Australian Society of Golf Course Architects, or Society of Australian Golf Course Architects. You are the captain, are you not, of the Australian Golf Writers Association?
Yeah, it's very,
I guess the point
I'm very pleased to be, but there's not a great deal of prestige associated with it.
Well, we think it's prestigious. We love you doing it because somebody else has to do the work. It's fantastic. Just tell us about that, and how do you think that it works for the industry?
Oh, look, I think I remember many years ago, I've been fortunate enough to cover a lot of sports, right across the board, most sports in fact. And I remember when there was an Australian Sports Writers Association, we used to have a Queensland and Australian Rugby League Writers Association. We actually had over 30 members. None of those exist now. There are no, right across the board in all sports, I think there's an Australian Racing Writers Association. But the Australian Golf Writers Association has been active and has been quite prominent in affairs of the industry for many, many years now. It was started by the late Don Lawrence, who was a wonderful writer for the Melbourne Herald, coined Jack Nicklaus as the Golden Bear nickname. And, you know, we don't like to poke our noses into people's affairs, but I think it's important. And there was an instance a couple of years ago when Golf Australia were going through, should we say, a few rocky paths. They brought in a new contractor to do the scoring at the Australian Open, the first day of the Australian Open. I think it was at Sydney, Royal Sydney. And, you know, we didn't particularly... We knew what was going to happen. And the first 90 minutes, it was just absolute chaos. And people who were operating websites, and we had people taking 11 on the first hole and 2 on the second, and the operators obviously just weren't up to the job. And we had a hasty meeting, the executive of the golf riders, and it wasn't affecting us that much at the time. It was affecting the internet people and the television people who were... And we had a meeting with Golf Australia, and I think midway through that afternoon, the previous contractor was in his truck coming down the highway from the Central Coast with lights ablaze, and he'd installed all his equipment, and the contractor who'd got the deal under very dubious circumstances was given the punt. And so there are occasional situations like that where I think it is advantageous to just have a little bit of clout. But we don't have any pretension about trying to tell people how to run their affairs, and in fact we try and have a very harmonious relationship with Golf Australia and the ALPG and the PGA, and I'm sure that most would agree that that's the way it operates.